ま、
ここクリックしてね。
Okay, so can everybody hear me okay? Okay, good, good.
Yep.
So thank you everyone for joining us. This will be the second last one, I hope. I actually went over the last time we had it 2 weeks ago, in which sorry, somebody just said, in which we went over the portion of Zendo Daishi or Shantou in the Shoshinge, and I wasn't too happy with the talk. So there are some things that I should have mentioned that I missed last time. So what I want to do is continue on with that portion on Zendo, because there's some very important information that I do believe you should know um, in understanding his teaching. So what I've done is I sent out earlier today prints for tonight, and it starts off with actually the 8 lines that are pertaining to Zendo Daishi. Let me just share that on the screen here with you. Okay, so you can see this, can you? Okay. So Zendo Daishi or Shantal, and these 8 lines come out in the Shoshinge, the hymn that Shinran Shonin wrote, that we've been going over since last fall. Um, and we started off, of course, going into the text, and we're now on the fifth of the 7 patriarchs, Zendo Daishi, which I talked about last 2 weeks ago. Again, I apologize for the absence last week. It just, as I alluded to in my email, was very busy. Not the best week for me last week, but in going over it, I wanted to actually go over these lines a little bit closer, so that I think there are some very important information that needs to be done. So last time I had talked about how Shinan had noted that Zendo was the one who corrected erroneous views from the past and also his contemporaries. And this erroneous views were particularly pertaining to the views regarding the Contemplation Sutra on Amida Buddha, what we call Kanmuryo Jukyo in Japanese. And in there, so the Contemplation Sutra was very popular around the when Zendo was alive, but it was popular. Many of them used it as a way to explain the Pure Land teachings, but they explained it in an erroneous manner. And so basically, the Contemplation Sutra starts off with a story of the tragedy of what we call tragedy of Rajagriha. And you've all heard this story a number of times about how um, there was a King King Bimbisara and Queen Vaidehi who um, didn't have any children for many years, and they really wanted an heir to the throne. So King Bimbisara goes up, has his advisors, and they go up to see this mountain ascetic to see, sort of get a fortune telling of how they or when they can expect to have an heir to the throne. And the ascetic reassures the king by saying, don't worry, when the time comes when my life ends, I shall return as your son, right? And of course, King Bimbisara not or wanting the heir sooner than later, asks this ascetic to take his own life. Of course, the ascetic refuses, and then um, the king has his guards kill him. But just before he dies, of course, this ascetic um, makes the warning. He says, mark my word, I will get my revenge. Right. So then, after he dies, um, Queen Vaidehi does become pregnant, and everything is going well. And as she nears conception, both the king and Queen Vaidehi become worried about the prophecy. So it says she gives birth to the baby on top of this tower, and they throw the baby off, and miraculously he survives with only disfiguring one baby finger. And after that, the king and queen raise him with all the love they can give him, realizing the error in their actions. And then, so the prince, his name is Ajatasattu, and so as he gets older, um, Devadatta, the Shakamuni's cousin, approaches Ajatasattu, asks him if he heard the story of, his baby finger. So you've heard all this before, and of course, Ajatasattu says that he just heard there was an accident when he was born, and so Devadatta tells him about his past life, and that the rightful position for him is to be on the throne, and Ajatasattu confronts the king, and the king doesn't deny it. So he throws the king in the prison, wanting to starve him to death, making him suffer. But Queen Vaidehi goes and visits the king regularly. And before she does, she bathes herself, like puts honey on her body, and then hides food in her clothing and goes and feeds them. So the king doesn't starve. And so Ajatasattu, after a period of time, asks the guards, has my father passed away yet? And of course, when he's told of what Vaidehi has been doing, he is enraged and he's about to kill his own mother, but his advisors tell him, you can't kill your mother. Sons have killed fathers to usurp the throne, but never has a son killed a mother. So Ajatasattu puts her into house arrest, locks her in her palace. And then, so from that point, Vaidehi then makes a wish to have an audience with Shakyamuni. And using his power, Shakyamuni from a distance comes. Well, first of all, he sends a couple of his attendants, and then he comes to see her. And Queen Vaidehi desires to be born into Amida's Pure Land. So then Shakyamuni tells her how she can do so. And he, first of all, goes through 13 meditative processes. So through meditation, visualizing the Pure Land and ultimately visualizing Amida Buddha. And then he goes through what we call the 3 non-meditative practices. And in there, he also talks about the 9 grades of beings, and from the top of the high grade to middle of the high grade, low of the high grade, top of the middle grade, middle of the middle grade, the low of the middle grade, and then the 3 at the lowest of the low being the very bottom. And it's this lowest of the low where there's a lot of contention that arises, because it's said that these beings, the lowest of the lows, they're beings who have committed 5 grave offenses, 10 discretions, have slandered the Dharma, basically lived their whole life not doing good. And it's only before they pass away that they encounter a good teacher who encourages them to listen to the teachings of Amida Buddha. But because they've been leading a bad life throughout, they can't even do that. They're so conflicted. And so they're told to just even recite the name 10 times, and then they will be reborn in the Pure Land. So in the Contemplation Sutra is basically, that's the shortest summation that I think I could make of the Contemplation Sutra. But in the end, so this whole idea of the lowest of the low entering the Pure Land was a point of contention for many of the other schools of Buddhism. They looked at it in a number of ways. One, of course, was that even though it says lowest of the low, in fact, the characters that come out in this Contemplation Sutra are not really lowest of the low, but they're playing a role. And that they are actually much higher beings. That was one sort of explanation or rationalization for this. But of course, Shantou or Zendo disputed this, saying that in fact, Queen Vaidehi did try to kill her own son. So and King Bimbisara did kill the mountain ascetics. So they are in fact, in reality, the lowest of the low. And another of the disputes was that the fact that even though it says that one's born into Pure Land, the argument was it wasn't immediately, but it's like way down in the future. So you're buying sort of a ticket down the road to be born in the Pure Land. And then finally, another one that they talked about was, well, if the lowest of the low, the person that did evil all their lives, can get into this Pure Land, but just by reciting 10 recitations of the name, well, then it couldn't be such a great place. So the example used there often is if you are buying a house, and the cheaper the house is, the easier that you're getting that house for. Generally, it's not going to be as nice a house as a more expensive house, right? So if the practice is very simple, then the Pure Land that's associated with that must also not be that great. So these were some of the things that people or other schools were bringing up, mentioning that this is why this contemplation or Amida is not that great. The other one that I did not mention last week, and what I wanted to talk about today, is very, very important, and that is that many of the other schools, they viewed the recitation of the name of Amida Buddha as sort of a wish. So it's like in Christianity, they talk about 10 Hail Marys, right? So it's sort of almost a wish to be born into the Pure Land. But the problem with that, according to the other schools, is that this is only a wish. And so it doesn't have the practice associated with this. And what this means is that, so in the Buddhist teachings, there are 3 elements necessary, they say, for enlightenment. And one is the aspiration or desire to attain enlightenment. And in Japanese, we call this hotsu bodaishi. Okay, the desire or aspiration to want to to attain enlightenment. You need that aspiration, but you also need a practice that goes along with that aspiration. And that's what we call gyo in Japanese. And then finally, by following that practice, one attains enlightenment. So that's the established elements to attain enlightenment. And what they were saying was that the recitation of Namo Amida Butsu, the Nembutsu, is basically just a wish and without any practice attached to it. And so, again, going back to the example of the house, it's like somebody saying, "Oh, I want to buy a house." Just having that desire can't allow you to buy that house. One has to actually work, save money, and when they finally saved enough money, then they're able to purchase the house. And so, um, they're saying it's basically like an empty wish, is what it is. And I put in here that it's like when we uh, I haven't done it in a number of years now, but when you go to the PNE, for those who are here locally, the Pacific National Exhibition, every year they have this. They call it the Dream House, and people end up buying tickets for this Dream House, and it's almost similar in that yes, you're hoping to win this dream house, but there's actually no practice associated with it. It's an empty wish. And that's how other schools viewed this recitation of the Nembutsu, is that yes, there's a aspiration there, a wish, but there isn't a practice associated. And this, to this exact point, so in Zendo Daishi's greatest work, the commentary on the Contemplation Sutra of Amida, at the very beginning, he gives a preface, and in the preface is telling basically the overall gist of what this is going to be talking about. In there, he has what we call in Japanese Rokujishaku. And the Rokujishaku is a breakdown, basically, of the meaning of the 6 characters. Rokuji means 6 characters. Shaku means interpretation or explanation. So he, in that prefatory passage, he actually explains explicitly how the 6 character name has both aspiration and practice. And so in there, he is quoted as saying this, and actually this is my translation. So there is a little bit of expansion of explanation in there that you don't find in the original translation. So in the Contemplation Sutra on Amida, it mentions the recitation of the name of the Buddha 10 times. In the recitation, there is 10 aspirations and 10 practices that are fulfilled. How are these fulfilled? In the 2 characters, na and mu, there is the meaning of taking refuge in the Buddha. It also means to be inspired to aspire for birth into the Pure Land. Okay? So the first 2 characters, namu or namo, has those 2 elements to it. Yes, it's to take refuge. And taking refuge means to follow the lead of Amida Buddha. But at the same time, he says this namu has that meaning of be inspired to aspire for birth in the Pure Land. So here's the aspiration part. You see, he says that it also has that meaning behind it. Then he says, the characters A, Mi, Da, and Butsu, the last 4 characters, is the practice. Now this next part I added in just to make it clearer. This practice is explained in what we call the 17th vow. And I've explained this before, how the 17th vow states what Amida Buddha says is that if the Buddhas in the 10 directions do not praise or recite the name of the Buddha, or recite my name according to Amida, um, then I shall not attain enlightenment. So the practice here is that if the Buddhas in the 10 directions praise and recite the name of the Buddha, then that practice is fulfilled, and the 17th vow is fulfilled. And in fact, we do see repetitively the Buddhas in the 10 directions all encouraging one to recite the name. So this the last four characters um, are the practice, and the merits from that practice are transferred to us to inspire us to aspire for birth or enlightenment. Thus, in the 6 character name of the Buddha exists both the aspiration of the sentient being along with the practice of reciting the name Amida Butsu, as prescribed by the Buddhas in the 10 quarters. Because of this, those who recite the name of the Buddha will assuredly be born into the Pure Land of Amida Buddha. So Zendo Shantao clearly states here there is both the aspiration and the practice. And so therefore, one is assuredly to be born in the Pure Land. So this 6 character explanation by Chantal becomes such a moving force in the Pure Land teachings following Zendo that in fact Honen Shoni, Shinnan's teacher, and Shinnan Shoni himself both view Chantal Zendo as an incarnation of Amida Buddha. And we can see this in Shinnan's writings in the what we call the wasans. I've been bringing some of the wasans up in explaining about some of the masters, and the hymns pertaining to Zendo Daisha or Chantal begins with this following poem or verse. Manifested from the ocean-like great mind was Master Chantal. For the sake of beings of this defiled world in the latter age, he called on the Buddhas of the 10 quarters to bear witness to his teaching. Okay, so again, here, when it talks about ocean-like great mind, that's reference to Amida Buddha. So manifested in the ocean-like great mind. So Zendo or Chantal is a manifestation of Amida Buddha, according to Shinna. That's how much he revered Zendo's teaching. And again, he says, for the sake of beings of this defiled world in the latter age, he called the Buddhas of the 10 quarters to bear witness to his teaching. So again, this is that 17th vow where saying the Buddhas from the 10 quarters will or promote the recitation of the name of the Buddha. That's the practice. So this is really an underlying theme to Zendo Daishi's commentary on the Contemplation Sutra. He emphasizes over and over aspects of the name of Amida Buddha and how it is both the cause and condition for our birth in the Pure Land. Mainly, he says that the light of Amida Buddha, or what we call komyo in Japanese, is the condition. It brings about the conditions for our awakening. And when we receive this light of Amida Buddha through receiving the name of the Buddha or the 6 character name, and we call this omyogo, myogo. And that actually becomes the cause for our birth. So the condition is created through Amida Buddha, the light of wisdom of Amida Buddha causes us or encourages us or inspires us to have this aspiration for entering the Pure Land, or aspiration to attain enlightenment. And so when we receive this in our hearts, this is what Shinan called Shinjing. Okay, when we awaken to this working of Amida and we receive it in our heart, this is called Shinjing. And for Shinan, he says this was the ultimate cause of birth. So Chantal, in his commentary on the Contemplation Sutra, he continues on to explain about the different aspects of awakening to the pure mind of Amida by using the parable, the very famous parable on the two rivers and white path, which Shinran also uses in his writing. Again, this is a very famous story that I've told a number of times, so I won't really go into the details here, but know that what happens in this parable, the two rivers and the white path, is there comes a point where the traveler traveling to the west, it comes to what we call the 3-point stance of death. That is that he fears that if he goes forward, he's going to be overcome by the river of fire and river of water. He can't go that way, and he also fears he can't go backwards where he came because the bandits are chasing him. And then finally, he realizes he can't stay still because he's going to be overcome by the bandits as well as beasts that are coming towards him. So, for an instant, he is at a sort of a virtual standstill or loss to do what to do. However, it's when he makes that decision at that almost same instance, he makes that decision to go on that white path. Even though it's very narrow, he decides he will follow that white path. And at that instant, he hears a calling voice from the other shore, which we say is the voice of Amida, saying, "Come as you are, I will not let you fall in." And then, so it's also said that instant that he makes that decision to go forward, it's also explained that he receives what we call a diamond-like mind or heart, and that's in this passage of the Shoshinge. So, as I show you on this passage, that Zendo Daishi talked about the light and the name being the cause and condition. And when we enter when the practitioner enters the great ocean of wisdom, the primal vow, this is according to that parable, that moment when the traveler makes that decision to go forward. And so when one makes that decision, and the Shoshinge says, he receives the diamond-like mind. Okay, and this diamond-like mind, or the diamond mind that Shinan talks about here, again, is comes from Zendo Daishi Chantal's commentary on the Contemplation Sutra. So in the beginning part of this commentary, Zendo Daishi writes a verse, a song. We call it Kisamboge. Kisamboge. We actually recite it regularly at funerals, or at least the traditional Dodo Shinshu funerals. Kisamboge is usually chanted just before we present the Dharma name. So at the very beginning of funeral services. And in there, Shantao or Zendo mentions that the next, or the bodhisattva who will be the next Buddha, has what we call the diamond like, or diamond heart, or diamond mind. And so what, by Shinran Shoni referring to this diamond like mind in this Shoshinge, he is saying that those who awaken to Shinjin, the traveler who makes that decision to go forward, at that instant they receive this diamond-like mind, and they become equal. So the bodhisattva who is going to be the next Buddha is the one we call Maitreya Bodhisattva, Miroku Bosatsu. And it said that this Maitreya Bodhisattva will come into this world at the extinction of the present Buddha Dharma. So the present teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha. When that dies out, the next Bodhisattva will come into this world, which is Maitreya, and Maitreya will then become the next Buddha. So Shinran is saying those who receive or awaken Shinjin are equal to Maitreya, which means at the end of this life, we're assured of birth in the Pure Land, or attainment of enlightenment at the end of this life. Okay, I don't know if you're following me or not. It's there's a lot to take in there. And regarding this diamond-like mind, it's called diamond-like mind because of three qualities. So one is diamond is very pure. There is no impurities in it. So the Dharma of Amida Buddha is pure. There is no impurities in it. It's also called diamond because diamonds are very hard and cannot be easily broken. And so it's saying that Amida's teaching is very similar to this. It's it can't be distracted by others or sayings of others. That it's very firm in its commitment. And finally, diamond is used because diamond is, again, because it's very hard, it could cut through anything. And so the diamond-like mind of Amida cuts through the darkness of our ignorance. Okay, so that's why diamond-like is commonly commonly used. And then he also says that this instance, going back to Shinran Shonin Shoshinge, says this instance is equated or accords with what we call the one thought moment of joy. So this one thought moment of joy comes from the passage on the completion of the 18th vow, where Shakyamuni Buddha basically says, when Amida fulfills his vow, he makes this passage, and it says, when sentient beings hear his name, have one thought moment of joy, and it recites the name, perhaps even one time, then they will attain, or they will enter the Pure Land. So one thought moment is that moment, that instant when one awakens or to the entrusting heart. And so he says in this Shoshinge that it's the same, that receiving this diamond mind is same as the one thought moment of joy. And when we receive that, he says we become like Vaidehi. So he's going back to that story that comes out in the Contemplation Sutra, where Vaidehi, upon hearing the teachings of Amida Buddha does awaken that one thought moment of joy. And when she awakens to that or receives that, she then has what we call, so in this translation they call the threefold wisdom, but actually I prefer threefold affirmations. Okay. And the threefold affirmations are affirmation of joy, affirmation of enlightenment, and affirmation of shinjin. An affirmation of joy refers to joy one receives in encountering the Buddha Dharma. Affirmation of enlightenment refers to how the enlightenment of the Buddha illuminates the darkness of my ignorance. An affirmation of Shinjin refers to being able to completely entrust yourself to Amida Buddha with a singleness of heart. And without any doubt, then one is truly liberated, just as Vaidehi was. So this is actually those 8 lines on Zendo Daishi or Shantao. So now I'm going to quickly go over the next person, which is Genshin. I know there's a lot to go over there, but please look at the notes and hopefully, and if you have questions, please feel free to ask me. So now we jump from China to Japan, and the last 2 of the 7 patriarchs are in Japan. And the first of those 2 is a person by the name of Genshin Kasho. And what you'll find interesting is that he is in fact sitting on a chair. The chair was something that was introduced to Japan from China. And so he is sitting on a chair, but he's sitting in the lotus position on top of the chair. So find that a little bit interesting. But this Genshin, prior to actually, before we get into Genshin himself, I want to just mention his teacher. His name was Ryogen. Ryogen was instrumental in. He's not listed as one of the 7 patriarchs, but he was one of the one who introduced basically Pure Land writings to Japan, or he popularized it. And again, just like Zendo, Ryogen wrote a commentary on the Contemplation Sutra, and okay, well, so Ryogen is Genshin's master, but getting into Genshin himself, so Genshin was born in the present-day Nara Prefecture, and he was born. It's said that his father passed away when he was still very, very young, and his mother was a very devout Buddhist follower, and so Genshin was said to have spent a number of his early years right by where he was born was a very famous temple named Taima Dera, or the Taima Temple. And it's famous actually for this mandala called the Taima Mandala, which is attributed to be made by Zendo Daishi. And I've actually posted on the very last page of this this picture of this mandala. I believe it's a woven mandala, and it's actually of the Contemplation Sutra. So it talks about the actual sutra itself, and you can't really make it out that well here, but it actually, so in the center here is Amida's Pure Land, but on the outside is the story of that Raja Grihar, tragedy of Raja Grihar, and how Vaidehi that story that I told you earlier. It's all depicted on this mandala. The actual mandala itself was supposed to be about 4 meters by 4 meters, so huge, very big, and it is attributed to be made by Zendo Daishi. And so when Genshin, as a small child, saw this mandala, he desired to be born into such a pure land. It also tells you a couple things, or tells you that the practice of the monks back then was quite incredible. And it's not unlike today. We see the Tibetan monks are very famous for what they call the sand mandala. Well, they'll spend hours on end making this beautiful mandala out of sand. And at the end, after they've completed it, then they sweep it all away to show the impermanence of things. Um, but this Taima mandala, if it really was Zendo who made it, it shows you how skilled that he must have been to weave a 4 meter by 4 meter, basically a rug that depicts all this. So, but anyway, so Genshin, upon seeing this mandala, has a desire to be born in the land of Amida Buddha. So subsequently, he then becomes a monk at the age of 9. It says that he enters a monk and goes up to Mount Hiei, becomes a Tendai monk. And Genshin was known for his intelligence. It's said that he's read all the teachings of the Buddha, and his intellectual prowess is quickly realized. And it's said that when he was 15, he even received an invitation by the emperor to give um, a discourse. I think it was on the Garland Sutra at the imperial palace. And when the emperor hears this discourse, he's so impressed by uh, Genshin that the emperor gives him many presents as gifts in return for the discourse that Genshin gave. And amongst that gift were some reams of fine silk to make clothing out of. Now Genshin at that point is overjoyed with what he has received from the emperor, and he actually sends the reams of silk cloth to his mother back at his uh, birth home. And of course, he's wanting to be acknowledged by his mother, expecting to be maybe even praised, or wanting his mother to be proud of his accomplishments. But this goes to show you how devout a Buddhist follower his mother was, because she actually sends back the silk, the reams of silk that Genshin sent, and she attaches a letter with it. And in that letter, she says that she was hoping that Genshin, or she when Genshin entered the monastery, she let him go into the monastery with the hope that he would become, or that he would become a teacher who would pass on to future generations the right dharma, or the proper dharma, so that the Buddha dharma can propagate generations to come. So in that sense, so in Japanese, it said that she wanted him to be that bridge to the future, and yet she says she was disappointed that he has become a monk who seeks worldly praise and accolades. And in Japanese, there's a phrase. So the Japanese version of this states his mother says, 後のようにの橋となって欲しかったのに、世渡りを上手な橋となった。So basically, what I said is that he wanted or she wanted him to be the bridge for the future, but she was disappointed that he was basically only seeing the accolades of the present. And so, upon hearing this, Genshin is shocked or is spurred on by her. And it said when he turns around 30, he enters this monastery. So Mount Hiei is sort of like a university of Buddhism. There are a number of temples on this mountain, all belonging to the Tendai school, but focusing on different areas. And the one area that he ended up staying in, this Eshin, it's called Eshin Monastery or Eshin, is a place where they really focused on the Pure Land teachings. So when Genshin was alive, it was what is known in Japan as a Heian period. Heian period ran from 794 to 1185, and it is usually and it's when the capital of Japan moved from Nara to what's known as Heian-kyo or Kyoto, and it is defined by the flourishing of culture and aristocracy. No, what's the word? Well, the aristocratic society. And so on the surface, it looks like a very flourishing period. And the prime example of that is what's known as the stories of Genji or Genji Monogatari by Lady Murasaki Shikibu. And it's almost like a Harlequin romance. It's showing the life of the aristocratic life. However, beneath that surface, actually, there was particularly towards the latter end of Heian period, there's a lot of pestilence, famine, unrest, and that ultimately leads to the downfall of the Heian period, when the warrior class uprises and takes power from the aristocrats. And so this underlying unrest that existed propelled Genshin to create his contribution to Pure Land School, and that's known as a collection of essential passages concerning birth in the Pure Land. And this is actually a very famous, in Japanese we call it Ojo Yoshu. And this piece is actually, it ingrains in Japanese society because it's basically made up in two major parts. The first part, it's telling how one enters the Pure Land. But before that section on how one enters the Pure Land, it gives a very graphic description of what hell is like. And so along with the written work are also scrolls, paintings. And this basically cements in the Japanese psyche the image of what hell is. And there's 8 different types of hells that are depicted. And in fact, even to this day, where right by where my mother was born in Kyoto, there's a very famous place called Rokuhara Rokuhara Temple, and there they have annually they have a festival of hell, basically, and they display these scrolls of image of hell, and basically what they're telling you is, and as little kids, you will be taken there to sort of warn you to behave, or you're going to fall into one of these different kinds of hells. And there's a very graphic pictures. One of them is if you lie, for instance, they have a hell where they uh, have these ogres who pull out the tongue of the individual, and they um, spike down the tongue on the ground, spread out the tongue and spike it down. So if you lie, that's you're going to go to that kind of hell. They've got a number of other ones. One is through one's greed. There's a mountain of uh, sharp needles that you have to climb, and so as you climb, your body gets all uh, torn up by these needles, and the moment that you die from this, you would think that you'll be relieved from it, but in fact, a wind wafts over, and suddenly you're at the bottom again, and you're completely revived, but you have to go through this process over and over. So, anyways, he describes the existence of hell, and then the second part of it is how one can aspire to be born into the Pure Land. And in that, he talks about different ways of. He says that there are various pleasures associated with being born in the Pure Land, and he describes different methods for attaining birth in the Pure Land, and he talks about the different capacities of individuals. But he also mentions that there is what they call the the true Pure Land, and then there's the uh, what's the word for and transformed land, which is sort of a temporary, not a real Pure Land, but you're close but not quite there. There are a number of versions or explanations of this. They'll say things like you're born into a womb palace, so you're in this place for 500 years without being able to listen to the Dharma, and then finally you eventually get there. But he talks about these two different kinds of Pure Lands that exist, and only through the recitation of the name can one enter what we call the true Pure Land. So in the passages, the 8 lines on Genshin, again, Shina starts off by saying that Genshin, having broadly elucidated the teaching of Shakyamuni's lifetime, so he's read all the teachings of the Buddha, wholeheartedly took refuge in the land of peace and urges all to do so. Ascertaining that minds devoted to single practice are profound, to sundry practices shallow, he set forth truly the difference between the fulfilled land and the transformed land. So again, as I mentioned, he said there were two types of pure lands. One is the true or the fulfilled Pure Land, versus the one that you will go to if you don't fully, with a singleness of single-hearted mind, you will go into this temporary Pure Land, if you will. And those who are burdened with extreme evil should simply say the name. And he says, although I too am within Amida's grasp, passions have struck my eyes and I cannot see him. Nevertheless, great compassion is untiring and it illumines me always. Again, this is a reference back to earlier in the Shoshinge. Shinran gives an example of like the sun shining on a cloudy day. Because of our ignorance, we can't see that sunlight directly, but we know that it's bright under the clouds. And similarly, we know the working of Amida exists, even though our defilements blind us from seeing it directly. We realize the great compassion and is always illuminating on us. So again, that was a very brief introduction to Genshin. But what I would like to do, I may go over a little bit more about Genshin next time, but focusing on Honen Shonin, the direct teacher of Shinran Shonin, and then that will conclude the Shoshinge, all the sessions for the Shoshinge. So next week, hopefully, will be the last one, unless you have questions or wish to have more of a free discussion. That will be fine too. Okay, so with that, that ends today's portion. There was a lot of material that was covered. Anybody have questions or comments or? Yes, Dana.
That was profoundly enlightening. It tied in what you did today was tie in a lot of loose ends for me, or a lot of gaps, and so it was very interesting. And one thing in particular, when you were talking about the recitation of the name, and I thought, oh well, desire can be thought of as similarly as the phrase of before one can attain their dream, one has to have a dream. So in order to have the desire, one has to have the desire in order to go on to this path of enlightenment, is how I saw the equation to the two phrases, that one must have a dream. And I have gotten through halfway of the Tale of the Genji. And so when you're talking about that, it helped me also to tie in some loose ends, and how deeply ingrained Buddhism is into the psyche of the people of Japan. So this was very good. Thank you very much for all these clarifications.
Oh, you're welcome.
Also,
glad-
sorry, I did. Oh,
Yes.
just a comment.
Hey.
We didn't know much Genshin before, but this lecture gave us a little clear connection from Saicho to Genshin, and then One and Shinran. Very interesting. Thank you.
So actually, one of the other things that Ryogen and then Genshin are known for, they actually promoted what we call the death rites, or the Nembutsu Samadhi before dying. And what this there's actually a very clear instruction just prior to passing away. What one is supposed to do is place a statue of Amida Buddha So you lie down with your head to the north, facing the west, and the
Mhm.
statue is supposed to be west of you. And then there's 7 different colored strings that you're supposed to tie to the hand of the Amida, and that then ties to the individual that's about to pass away. And then you're supposed to constantly recite the name of the Buddha. And this was actually a practice that was done during that period, not just for monks and nuns, but for, well, mainly the aristocrats would have done it. And again, this was a way for them to visualize entering or being welcomed by Amida Buddha and entering into the Pure Land. And it became quite a
Samadhi.
popular practice. And to this day, there are schools like the Chinese Buddhists, and they have something very interesting. If you go to some of the Chinese temples, you can buy, or they might even be able to give it to you. They have these little speakers. It's almost like the size of like a Walkman type thing, a very small thing that constantly there's an IC chip in there, and so all it does is it repeatedly um, recites the Nembutsu, but in a very melodic song. So the Chinese one, it goes Namo Amitabha, Namo Amitabha, Namo Amitabha. So, and this is basically a song that repeats over and over and over and over. So some of the Chinese followers, like if they're in the hospital, they will have this little speaker beside their bed, and it's just reciting the Nimbutsu over and over and over to them. And it's one way of, I guess, comforting the individual. One scholar once said that it's actually like athletes who do what we call mind training. So you're training your mind to sort of visualize entering the Pure Land. But so that was a practice that was really popularized and brought great comfort to people. As I said, there was this underlying with the pestilence, the famine, etc. There were many people dying, so this was one way for them to deal with just before passing away. Okay. Any other questions or comments? If not, thank you all for attending, and one more session, and then we'll be done for the summer. So thank you all.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you
That's
very
wonderful.
much.
Thank you, Sensei.
Thank you, Sensei.
Okay.
Good night, everyone.
Good
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 night.
night.